I was cleaning up the living room and had just finished putting away the last dishes of Thanksgiving dinner when my brother came running in. "Hey, you two, we're going to play a game. You can watch if you want." I raised an eyebrow at him and turned and ran back out of the room. My parents were sitting across from each other reading their own books. He seemed excited about whatever game he was playing with his sister, which probably meant it would be a good one. Giving them a quick glance, I shrugged and followed my brother outside. "Dad," I called out as I walked up to him, "we're going to go play football. Do you want to come and watch?" He looked up from his book and smiled. "I would love to," he said as he got up from the chair and began walking towards me. I turned around and walked back inside. I heard him exclaim as we got closer to the door. My excitement faded when I saw my mom look up from her book, giving us a frozen stare. I felt my stomach drop as the words left her mouth. "I'm going to go lie down for a few moments," she had said in a shaky voice. She got up from her chair and began walking towards the hall that leads to one of the bedrooms. I couldn't stand there in silence. We walked over to the field behind the house. I was about to ask if she wanted to come watch when I heard a faint noise from inside the house. I glanced at my mother and then back towards the house, but she didn't seem to be reacting to anything, so I looked back at her and asked her what the clear noise was. She said it's nothing and began walking faster. At this point, she was acting very, very strange. I wanted to press her about the noise, but did not want us getting distracted from our walk, so I let it go, and we just continued to enjoy ourselves. As soon as we got back home, we saw my mother sitting in the chair reading her book. She looked up at us with a smile. "Football," I replied bluntly, after she had asked us what game we played. At this point, she was acting increasingly strange, saying weird things, doing weird things, and just acting out of the ordinary. At one point or another, I could have swore that I saw her eyes roll in the back of her head and come back black, like all black. No iris, nothing, but only for a second before she blinked and looked at me, smiling and saying, "What's wrong, honey?" She would also proceed to make strange comments about the house, talk about what's up in the attic, talk about strange noises, just weird stuff. After about a 45-minute game of football, my dad, my brother, and I all decided to come in and lay down on the couch. That turkey and mashed potatoes were now needing to digest properly, and I think we overdid it playing football. My mom would come out and say more weird stuff, even to the point where my dad would ask her, "Honey, are you feeling okay?" And she would just always respond with a resounding smile, turning and walking almost fidgetly back to the room, like she was a robot, very awkwardly moving. My dad was convinced she had taken some sort of medication or something. That was before she dropped on the floor convulsing, eyes rolling in the back of her head and coming back fully black. And in that moment, we knew something was seriously wrong with her. But she wasn't behaving the way a typical person does when they have a stroke or have some sort of seizure. She was smiling, very creepily, and laughing, all in a voice that wasn't her own, while her eyes were stark black, like an 8-ball. I felt like we were reliving something from the Evil Dead movies. After a couple moments of this going on, we got her to calm down, and when she would close her eyes would go back to normal. That's when we really began hearing banging and loud crashing sounds in the attic. Somebody was up there. My dad demanded that we take care of our mother, put her in the bed, and maybe put her to bed for rest. My father was going to go inspect what was in the attic. He goes over to the hallway, pulls down the string. The ladder comes down. He grabs a large knife, grabs a flashlight, and slowly ascends the ladder. Step by step, he climbs. He gets to the point where he can now barely poke his head above the attic floor, and he's now scanning the entire surrounding. But he also hears pitter-pattering, like something running or moving. After shining the light, he doesn't really see much, but notices that a portion of the attic One of the corners in which he's shining a light in is so black that the light will not pierce through it, unlike the other portions of the attic which the light can clearly illuminate. He gets a really, really bad feeling. He immediately turns off the light, drops down the ladder, faster than I've ever seen the man move, and slams the attic shut. He's pale, and he looks right at me and my brother and tells us, "We need to call a priest." And I start looking back at my mom and back at him, saying, "What are you talking about? What's going on?" He tells me to shut up, and he does not want any arguments. Not now, not ever. He grabs the phone and begins dialing a number. I don't know who he's talking to or who he's calling, but he kind of steps out of the room. I could hear his conversation, but only ever so faintly. He's trying purposefully to keep his voice down, and he sounds very panicked and nervous in his tone of voice. I tried my best to eavesdrop while my brother, carefully, very carefully, watched over our very sick and possessed mom. My dad walked into the kitchen while still on the phone and then sat outside, talking for quite a while with whoever this person was. I heard him hang up, and then, out of nowhere, he pulls out a cigarette and starts smoking. Quick side note here. My dad used to be a huge smoker for a long time, but gave it up about 7 or 8 years before this happened. He's only smoked a handful of times since then, and it's only when he's extremely stressed out. So I see him start shaking and lighting up a cigarette. I step out to ask him, "Dad, are you okay? Is Mom going to be okay?" And he doesn't really say anything. He's just staring off into the night while puffing on the cigarette. And without even making eye contact, just tells me, "A priest should be here within the hour. I need you right now to go spend the rest of the time with your mother until he comes." I knew not to ask my dad questions, so I closed the door and walked back to where my mother was, spending that time with her. Ultimately, unsure of what was going on, but I knew that was irrelevant in that point in time. I just needed to be with my mom. I think she had been sleeping this whole time, but I'm not sure. Either that or resting. Once the priest had shown up, there were some short pleasantries exchanged and some little bits of conversation that I missed. But once I went to shake his hand, he seemed very monotone, and in fact, there did not seem to be much conversation at all exchanged between my father and him, almost like they knew what needed to be done. They talked outside for quite a while, before he came in and blessed the house. Then, he also went into my mom's room and spoke with her for a long time. The door was shut, and my brother and I were not allowed in. We had to sit back, pacing back and forth, wondering what was going on. At random points throughout the entire 45-plus minutes he was there, with the door closed, we could hear her at various points screaming and saying, "No, get out of me. You're not allowed here." And then hearing this maniacal laughter coming from a different voice within her that was not hers. At other random points, too, we would hear banging and crashing up in the attic, as if somebody dropped an entire stack of books over and over. To say my brother and I were petrified would be a massive understatement. But there was nothing we could do. We sat on the couch in the living room, talked about what we thought was going on, and gave much speculation to the whole idea of ghosts and my mom being possessed, which, by the way, we still believe, even all these years after. Maybe an hour, maybe a little more, the priest came out, with him and my father talking quietly. They said their goodbyes and the priest left. My father looked at me, then my brother, and kind of gave a kindful nod, and then looked down at the floor before saying, "Your mother's very sick. She needs as much rest as she can right now. I don't want you guys bothering her until I say so. Do you understand?" We nodded and agreed. He told us it was about time for bed. It was maybe 8:30 p.m. at this point, so we did our routine, brushed our teeth, got our pajamas on, and went and laid down. But as we're laying there in our bunk beds, we could hear something going on upstairs in the attic. Things were getting more crazy. At this point in the night, my father was already laying down with my mother, and their door was shut. I heard no sounds from my mom, but people were very much so in the attic, or so it sounded. It was creepy. It kept my brother and I up almost all night. We were scared to sleep. We didn't know what was going to go on. At several points, I could have sworn that I heard the attic door come down. But from my point of view where I'm at in my bed, I have full view and nothing ever came down. At least that I'm aware of. That night was easily the most terrifying. There were a couple times that I probably dozed off for short intermittent periods of time. And one point in the night, I woke up to my brother saying in his sleep, "It's in the house. It's in the house. It's in our room," which literally sent shivers down my entire body, and I had 2 comforters on me, as if I already wasn't cold enough. But what was even more strange is my parents' complete denial of any of this ever going on. As days would pass at this point, my father refused to talk about it or acknowledge any of the things that went on that Thanksgiving evening, and my mom just acted like everything was okay. She still said and did things that were out of character, but not to the extent that it was that Thanksgiving evening after dinner. We would also still hear noises in the attic that went on for quite a while. I want to say months if I'm remembering correctly. All the way up until the following summer or fall. Not as crazy as that night, but it's definitely interesting to think about. Also, I should include that this all happened on Thanksgiving of 1995. Now, my father passed away back in 2017, and shortly before he died, my brother and I finally got him to open up about it. And while he did not say much, he told me that he believes there were 2 demons in that house. One, which resided up in the attic, which is what he saw, hence the black shape or shadow that was covering part of the attic wall, and the other took possession of our mother. After a few months, he claims it got bored and left her body, but I don't know if that's how demons work. My mother passed away in 2019, only 2 years after my father. All of these experiences has left me with far more questions than any answers. I was getting ready to go out on a date when my friend called and told me he saw something strange in the woods. This is in Louisiana, so werewolves and the rougarou have been talked about here for a while. But it's not often that you actually run into somebody who claims to have seen one. So, of course, I wanted to see it for myself. We took our bikes and headed out into the woods. That's near where we lived. It was foggy, and I did not feel right about it, but we kept going. The light from our bike lamps suddenly got blocked by something tall. My friend got freaked out and turned back, but he would tell me later that whatever it was had glowing red eyes. I kept going, not knowing what to do or where to go. It stood on 2 legs and was covered in dark brown fur, like the kind you would imagine a creature to have. Although I could not see its face, it did not move at all when I turned my bike light toward it. The worst thing about this creature was that it had paws similar to that of a dog, but much larger. In fact, they were more like hands, similar to that of a raccoon. They were also covered in hair and ending in long 3 to 4 inch claws. The arms were just as big, in fact, about as thick as the thickest part of my own thigh. When I turned back toward where I had come from, the light on my bike suddenly went dead. It was like the moment I turned away, my light would go dim and would flicker as if there was some electronical interference on my LED light. I panicked, turned around to head back, and that's when this thing began coming towards me from the swamps behind me. All that came into view were these 2 red eyes and a very dark space between 2 trees. That's when I saw a huge hand going back in the darkness, holding onto a tree. I pedaled as fast as I could, back to where I came from. I called my friend when I got back. He never made it home from the other side, but would later tell me he saw the same thing I did, and he refused to go near it. Now, it's been almost 20 years since this happened, and I still wonder what was following me that night. This was also during Black Friday, right after Thanksgiving, and me and my friends got together on Thanksgiving, since I don't see them often, which, again, is why we went exploring here in the swamps. Every Thanksgiving, it was kind of our ritual to get together, since they lived up north. Once they would come down, every Thanksgiving, while food was being prepped, we would spend it playing in the swamps. And then Black Friday, as our parents were out shopping and spending unnecessary godly amounts of money. This is when we would also spend our time in the swamps. And this is when this happened. Now, after this experience, the Thanksgivings after this weren't as enjoyable. We stayed out of the swamps and spent our time bored inside. It's a nightmare that I still have to think about. Last year on Thanksgiving, my family was sitting around the dinner table. It was a great dinner, and I think everybody was feeling pretty good. My niece brought up the subject of past lives, which sparked some of us to start talking about it. My cousins said they've experienced past life memories while meditating, but nothing too deep or anything that was scary. Then, my dad also said he's explored the idea for a while. Nothing specific, though. My mom then mentioned that she had seen a ghost in her house when she moved in 25 years ago. Her new neighbors were over for dinner, and they had seen the same thing. This led to my mother telling us this story about moving into an empty house with her 3 daughters, and one weird neighbor telling him that the house was haunted. They had led to strange things happening that they could not figure out. The closet door would unlock and open itself. The things would go missing. Strange noises were heard in the middle of the night. After a few weeks, my mother decided to ask their neighbors who lived next door if they ever experienced anything strange, because she began to believe it was haunted. The neighbors had said they believed the ghost of his ex-girlfriend, since he used to live in the house with his girlfriend, came back, but she did not want anybody else living there. They thought that she had died in the house, but nobody could find her body. Her family even came to her house looking for her. The day my mom asked about the neighbor about his ex, she came up missing after all these strange things happening in the house. They never found any clues as to where she went, and they actually left the neighborhood because of it. Needless to say, my family is definitely not ghost hunting anytime soon, especially after the neighbors went disappearing. This time of year, things can be rough for a lot of people. I'm usually a hermit kind of person, and I choose to spend my time alone. I've been that way for as long as I can remember. This particular year was no different for me. I live by myself. On Thanksgiving, I drove back to my house. It was foggy, so when I got to the driveway, I saw what appeared to be like 2 sets of eyes running from the woodline right near my house. I stepped out of my car, walking down the driveway to see if it was somebody there. I had a Bowie knife strapped to my thigh, and I carry a 9mm with me too. I was packing and was not afraid to use lethal force if I needed it. There were some trees by a small hill next to my house. These eyes were almost resting there on top of it, and suddenly, I see this figure come from behind one of the trees and is kind of moving around, like it was not wanting to be seen. That's when I realized it was much larger than a person. It was huge. Everything around it began shaking as this being or person or thing began moving quickly, almost hitting the trees. After seeing this, I went inside quickly, called my uncle, and described what happened to him. He's a very experienced hunter, far more than I am. He said that it was probably what they call a dogman. I never heard of that before. I actually had to get online and research what it could have been. This is the most significant and lasting effect this sighting has had on my life. It's the realization that there are things in this world we cannot explain. The idea of a dogman may seem absurd to some, but after my experience, I'm not so sure anymore. The events of that Thanksgiving day have given me a new perspective on the paranormal, and it's opened up a whole new adventure of exploration for me. Cryptozoology was always interesting, but just pseudoscience. But now, I believe it's more real than ever, and there could possibly be other creatures out there that are werewolf-like. This happened right around Thanksgiving weekend, 2014. Years back, I was camping with my kids. It was late, and we were all getting settled in for the night, when one of them said they had heard something in the distance. We listened carefully, but didn't hear anything else. A few minutes later, there it is again, a strange sort of howling sound echoing through the trees. All four of us jumping to our feet and began looking around nervously. Then I saw it. The creature came out from behind a tree, roughly 30 yards away, standing there, huge body covered in dark fur, long black claws on its paws like some kind of crazed animal. Only it was not an animal. It had these red eyes which glared right at me, as if trying to hypnotize me. Fortunately, I resisted any and all attempts for it to control my mind. I pointed my rifle at it and was about to fire when I heard a growl come right behind me that scared me. The creature's mate came up from behind and began growling while exposing her long yellow fangs. We slowly backed away as they both continued to approach us. We got far enough, made enough distance between ourselves and these things to run to the car. Even now, I think about it to this day, and I wonder why we were spared. They were nothing like what I would have expected, but that's what they were. Some sort of werewolf-looking creature. A man with a dog's head. Massive muscles bulging, but they were no taller than I. They were also wide and bulky. Not necessarily weightlifter bulky, but more like lean football player bulky. The hair on their body was short. It was almost more like a Rottweiler. Very short, but short enough you could see the muscle definition. And their eyes, the way they shined reminded me of that of a cat's eyes when caught in headlights. A flash almost reflecting off, except they glowed on their own. Whatever these beings were, they were a perfect blend of human and canine. Its arms and legs like that were shaped like a man's, but there was so much muscle definition, it was frightening. I felt more like I was watching something through one of those distorted mirrors at an amusement park. Running as fast as I could, we made it to the car. Everybody got in. A few seconds later, we heard yet another howl that chilled me to the bone. They were still out there, and they were not happy with us stealing their kill. We drove off into the night as fast as we could, but every shadow I saw that night looked like one of them. I've told this story several times now, but each time it feels more and more surreal to me, as if I were watching a movie or something. The whole thing was very vivid and realistic, more so than any other experience in my whole life. Let me start by saying that I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I was never bothered by it as much as most people, until I got older and experienced something that made me question everything. Back in 2012, I lived alone in a cabin on a reservation. This was only a few years ago now. Around 9:30, I lived alone, and I was getting ready for bed after a long day of work. As I laid down in bed, I felt the sensation of somebody watching me from the outside window. It was nothing but a natural reflex to raise my head up and look out my window to find nothing unusual. This didn't dissuade me from feeling safe and going back to bed, since I was used to watching for coyotes and other small animals that would come up to my window. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I heard what sounded like somebody walking around on the roof of my cabin. This made me uneasy. I knew nobody else lived in this area, and there were no wild animals that could possibly imitate those kind of noises, or be that heavy. I sat there in bed, frozen with fear, as the sounds of whoever or whatever it was were walking around on top of my roof. Closer, closer. Then, all of a sudden, after about 10 minutes of this walking around, it stopped, and I could not hear anything anymore. Just complete silence. Another 5 minutes passed by. I decided there was no way I was going to fall back asleep. So I got up, started reading on my phone. As I was halfway through my chapter on my book, I hear this scratching noise coming from the side of the house, which is right next to where my window is. It sounded like somebody was trying to pry parts of the boards off. I stood up, quickly looking outside. As quietly as possible, I crept over to the front door of the cabin, grabbing my steel baseball bat, ready to whack whoever it is, playing real-life whack-a-mole. I peeked outside but didn't see anything. As carefully as possible, I crept out, the door now fully open. Nothing but darkness. I put my shoes on and walked outside, searching for any sign of anything. My heart was the only thing that was audible. It was racing and beating so hard, I figured the whole neighborhood would hear it. I stood there, standing on my porch, waiting for anything to happen, but nothing did. I stood there, gripping my bat tightly, ready to swing at the next thing that moved. But after nothing happened, I walked back inside, breathing a heavy sigh of relief, and figuring maybe it was just all in my head. Maybe I was having a lucid nightmare. I went back and lay down, and that's when the scratching continued. But it was more faint, like it was muffled, kind of like the sound you hear when it happens behind a closed door. Muffled. And then I began hearing breathing noises. Heavy, raspy, heavy breathing. It would get louder and noisier, and then stop, and then resume again, starting off really quiet and crescendoing till it got really loud and rinse and repeat all over again. Sometimes I would see lights flicker on and off all throughout the night. That entire night was a mix of emotions: scared, confused, exhausted. I just wanted it to end. The next morning, I want to say I at least got some sleep, but I can't be too sure. There were some things in the cabin that were broken. Shattered, actually. A couple of glasses that were left on the floor. It looked as if somebody had just shattered them, like somebody stepped on them or hit them with a hammer. But there were these weird scratch marks embedded into my countertops and the side doors. They were the size of handprints, and I wasn't sure if it was a good idea to call the police or not. Would they believe me? Would they even be of help, or would they suspect me, on token on old Mary Jane? I had the realization here that I think my cabin is haunted, and even though I spend most Thanksgivings alone, this was one I certainly would not forget. You see, after this happened, I started sleeping with my door open, occasionally getting up in the middle of the night and opening the front door, just for my own security and my own assurance that nothing was out there. Nothing was going to come and harm me in my own cabin. The scratching continued, and even the breathing, but that eventually faded away. Nothing ever really happened after that, and I'm still convinced there is an evil spirit living in that cabin, and it certainly made itself known on that Thanksgiving night. I live in Indiana, and I've seen a humanoid form late at night in the woods near my house. It was an entire humanoid figure standing on two legs. It looked like it had long hair and was very tall when I saw it from afar, so my family and I saw it from afar as well. It was standing near the tree line, looking at us, but no discernible features like eyes or mouth, just a dark human-shaped form. We thought it might be fake or possibly somebody pranking us. We did not want to investigate further than that, even though deep down, we all believed it was something dark. So we were now in our backyard with a bunch of other people. We're all sitting down looking at the stars, and we spotted it again, standing in the trees with the help of my telescope, which means that this thing was tall enough to stand out against the tree line, or at least stood out enough. This is not something you can get confused with an ape or anything else. It looked very human-like. After that, I kind of forgot about it until many years later, when I began reading about other sightings and how people see similar things, like Bigfoot, dogman, or other creatures. I also saw something like this when I was in high school. It wasn't near my home, but more when I lived up north in Michigan. It happened when we were driving back from Ohio one night. We saw what looked like two very tall figures jumping near the back of a truck. They had these massive gaping mouths that were full of teeth, and they stood roughly 4 to 5 feet tall I remember it was also right around midnight, too, when we saw them, and they had just ran out of a large field. I did not see their faces clearly enough, but they had long shaggy hair, and the mouths were the thing that stuck out to me the most. One was standing on each side of the open bed of the truck, and they were also kind of hunched over. They seemed to be watching the cars pass by. I couldn't tell you if they were canine or like, but they were furry humanoid-looking creatures. Terrifying. I would like to share with you a series of events that happened to my family on Thanksgiving. It all began the day before, when my sister Lauren and I were in the kitchen getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner. While we were in there, we both had this feeling that somebody was watching us. We looked around but did not see anything out of the ordinary. Then it happened. We heard what sounded like a door opening from another room in the house, and then a sound of something heavy being dropped onto the floor. We both agreed that it was not coming from upstairs or downstairs. We could feel it through the ground under our feet. We waited about 5 minutes to see if it would happen again, but nothing ever did. The next day, Thanksgiving Day, I awoke at around 6 a.m. to feed our dogs. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, my sister is already there, getting her morning coffee. She looks at me, asking me if I heard anything last night when we were in the kitchen, getting ready for dinner. My sister knew that something had happened. She wouldn't have asked if she didn't. I told her that I heard the same thing as she did. We both agreed it was probably just a mouse or something and laughed it off. But we knew it wasn't. We could have heard the sound through our feet, and not from upstairs or downstairs. Something was going on, and we were going to try to get to the bottom of it. As soon as my husband walks into the kitchen, grabs his coffee, my sister begins telling him about the sound from last night. Now, quick side note here. My husband is a huge skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal or supernatural, but he decided to humor us and say that it could have been Scott's grandfather, who at this point had passed away many, many moons ago, but he was apparently coming back as a spirit for Thanksgiving dinner. I knew what he was doing, trying to get us to laugh about it so we could forget about the sound. I just had a bad feeling that was not going to happen. We went on with our day. My husband was busy cleaning up the leaves in our backyard and getting all of his tools put away before dinner time. He ended up going into the front of the house. He could hear a strange noise coming from somewhere close by and wanted to see what it was. He walked around for about 10 minutes. It sounded like a droning noise or somebody kind of calling out his name. He couldn't find anyone or a trace or source of the noise. So he went up into the house to grab his afternoon cup of coffee. As soon as he walks into the kitchen, I'm sitting at the table, still drinking on my morning cup, talking to Scott's mom. That entire dinner, just something felt so off. We could not pinpoint what it was. My husband seemed very bothered by something. Later on after dinner that evening, he reported a strange ringing in his ears that got so bad he began vomiting up blood all over himself. We ended up taking him to the ER, but unfortunately, they did not find anything wrong with him. And for the next 2 weeks after this, he got very mysteriously sick. After multiple trips to the ER and multiple testing, there was nothing they could do for him. Luckily, he recovered by about mid-December and claims that the entire time he was deathly sick, he would have this same reoccurring nightmare of this dark, shadowy figure walking up to the house and going in and out of his own body, using him like a puppet. He would then go on to have nightmares of murdering people and being murdered himself. He believes it was total demonic possession, but I can't say for sure whether it was or wasn't. But I do know for a fact it was definitely supernatural in nature. To keep this as short as I can, I was deer hunting in the New River Gorge in Fayetteville, West Virginia. This was 2007, the week of Thanksgiving. It was in the evening time, with about 2 hours of daylight left. I noticed movement about 60 yards towards the gorge from my position. I raised my gun to view the movement through the scope. After holding it in position for 10 seconds or so, I see a very large hand appear from side of the large poplar tree. It was palm against the tree, and I saw fingers mostly. Then, to my surprise, I see a head peek from around a tree, and two large eyes affixed on a head of a creature I've never ever seen before. I'm a hunter, have been since I was 8. I'm now 38 years old. This Bigfoot, or whatever it was, blinked twice while looking at me, then stepped back behind the tree. I viewed it for about 20 seconds while it was looking at me. My mind just could not figure out what it was that I was looking at. I knew what it wasn't. I had no desire to shoot it, and very well could have, but my mind and body almost seemed to be in a state of shock while viewing it through my scope. I had to cross near the location and trail if out in the woods. I was terrified with my loaded deer rifle. My hair stood on end when I realized I would have gone towards the woods of the location to get out. I called my uncle as soon as I got to my Jeep, told him. He believed me. I'm a very honest man and would never lie about this. The thing is, though, I never heard it run away or move through the trees. You could hear movement from 200 plus yards off in these woods. It's like it just disappeared. I came home very shaken from this experience. It changed my life forever, now that I know it's out there. It was very cool looking, about 7 feet tall. It had very dark, large pupils, and around the pupils, its eyes were very much like an owl. From the experience, its fur was also brownish blonde, and it had a very visible face. It almost reminded me of a face like a troll face that you used to put on the pencils as a kid, but it was very clean looking and not what you would expect. Its fingers were long and thick, with no fur. It had dark fingernails. I had my scope on 9 power, and it was the equivalent to being about 30 feet from me visually. It was real. I would take a polygraph and right now and swear on my life. This happened back in 2003. It still deeply disturbs me. So, my mom, dad and brother and I are having Thanksgiving at my grandparents' house. My grandmother lives about an hour away from us, so we're driving out there for dinner. It's later in the evening, but still light outside when we get there. My grandmother has this big old country-style table that we all sit at. Even though most of us are adults now, parents included. But anyway, some people arrived ahead of us, so their plates are already on the table, filled with turkey, mashed potatoes, all sorts of delicious food. For some reason, I don't remember why. I'm not sure if my brother was sick or something, but my brother sits at a little table and chair, instead of one of the adult chairs. Anyway, my dad sits down, and he realizes that something is off. My grandmother had just stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, yet we just saw her in the kitchen. We all began looking around at each other, thinking we're crazy. And then we see her again coming down the hallway. All 3 times, she was wearing different colored shirts and pants with the same kitchen apron on. After she came out of the kitchen again, she was dressed in a different shirt. We had all looked at each other, asking her if she felt okay. Now, to preface this, I want to say it is impossible for her to move around the house this quickly without any of us ever seeing it. There is no way that my 65-year-old grandmother can move all the way back to her back bedroom, change pants and shirt that quickly, without us ever seeing it. It didn't make sense. Either this is a glitch in the Matrix, or she is a doppelganger, or it was the most convincing prank she has ever pulled. In 2007, I was traveling to the family home in the mountains to spend Thanksgiving with my family. My mom and I were driving, and she was swerving down the mountain like she always does. She's a very dangerous driver, let me tell you. We hit this patch of black ice in the area where there had been no weather reports indicating any possibility of it forming. We spun out of control on this road that is mostly straight, but has a couple of curves along the way. As we're spinning, Things start flying past our windows so quickly, but at the same time, so slow. I couldn't make heads or tails of what was happening until everything stopped moving, and I realized all 3 of our tires on our car had blown out. There was smoke everywhere, from each tire deflating, and burning rubber permeated the air. My mom and I had 40 minutes to get our butts out of Dodge before we had completely slid down an embankment with no way to get back up. It's a 2-lane country road. We were very fortunate that we even got cell service. As we sat there, waiting for the tow truck to come and take us to my uncle's house, which is where we were heading initially, we felt like we were being watched by something. I know, that sounds pretty far-fetched, but it's just a feeling that I felt off in the woods, and I'm not sure what it was, or what could have made it, but something was there. We could feel a disturbance. We felt incredibly uneasy the entire time we're waiting for this tow truck. Finally, when it shows up, even the tow truck driver kind of noticed it. He didn't say anything, but he was looking around and acting very strange, like he just wanted to get out of there and get the job done. He was working faster than usual. While we were in the truck with him, he mentioned if we saw what he did, and he went to tell us that he saw a large figure staring at us through the trees, but he assumed it was a large man trying to mug us. There really wasn't much said about it other than that. I can't help but wonder if our experience was actually something else, that it was not a man, but something supernatural. I'm a girl who has never had any real experiences with the paranormal, until this Thanksgiving, 2013. At around 10 at night is when it happened. I was getting ready for bed when I heard scratching on my window. I thought it could be nothing. That was true. When I looked there was nothing. I then heard it again, but louder and closer. When I jumped up out of bed and walked to the window where I heard it, there was nothing there. The next room over, which was my sister's room, there were knocks on her window, and decided to go see what it was. Again, nothing there. But when I went in, I walked back to my room, and the banging continued. I finally got tired of it, grabbing my 9mm out of the drawer, still using my phone for a light. I walked to where I had heard the loud banging on the roof, but saw nothing. It was then that I decided that this is all pointless, and started to walk back inside, and that's when I heard footsteps sounding like they were on the roof. I looked out, but nothing was there. I was confused. The next thing I know, all hell broke loose. Whatever it was jumped down, hitting my window, which made me jump back, startled. Then, everything went quiet for about 5 minutes, until it ran around my house, tearing up the walls on the outside. By now, all the dogs in my house were going crazy, barking like crazy. I ran towards the front door, not knowing what to expect or see when I would open it. I stood there, looking through the peephole, only seeing darkness. After a few moments of silence, whatever it was began banging on the house now. I stepped back, getting my 9mm ready. Then, out of nowhere, I hear a bloody scream, like a scream of pain, all around. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and then I hear another bang. The pit bull that I had was going absolutely crazy, barking at the back door, then running back by the front door, losing it. I thought we were under attack by a demon or something. Finally, I got sick of all this nonsense, opened my front door, aimed my handgun out into the darkness, expecting some sort of goblin face or something to appear that I could shoot at, but nothing happened. Everything just went quiet. I stepped out outside on the porch, expecting something to happen, anything, a noise, a sound, more scratching, banging, or being followed. But nothing. Everything was quiet, too quiet. It was eerie. The atmosphere was different. You could cut it with a knife. It was so unnerving. So in that moment, I decided I should probably just go sit back inside and wait for things to calm down. After going back inside, locking every door and window I had, and my sister was awake by this point, and she's scared out of her mind. There were no more sounds. It's almost like whatever was tormenting us had decided, for whatever reason, to stop, which, hey, I'm not going to argue against, but things were still very uneasy. Even my dogs kept whining and pacing back and forth, expecting something to happen at any given moment. The rest of the night remained pretty uneventful and calm, and once daylight finally broke, and I had not slept all night, I stepped outside, looking in the snow, where I saw these massive tracks that looked like something big and bipedal had jumped off of our roof. And there were tracks all around our house. Large tracks. They looked clawed, but I could not tell by the shape of the feet. Either way, I believe that demons can physically manifest, and that's what we encountered on that Thanksgiving night, all those years ago. My grandfather passed away many years ago, and so, not that long ago, my family and I got together on Thanksgiving and used a Ouija board to try and talk to him. Big mistake, right? Yeah, exactly. So keep in mind, this is going to be very long, so if you can bear with me, it'll be a little bit more manageable. Anyway, to set everything up for you, my grandfather was a great guy. He actually used to be a train conductor for quite some time before retiring, and then finally passed away in '92. He had a massive stroke or a heart attack. One of the two. I can never remember if the two coincide, but either way, he passed away. I was young at the time and don't have that many memories of him, although there are several pictures of him holding me as a baby and even a young child, so I must have had some bonding experiences with him. My mother always told me he was very fond of me and my sisters. He was a very, very sweet, loving man, and having him pass was hard on the entire family. So when he did pass, it was devastating. In fact, my uncle, who is no longer here with us, ended up going on a drug binge, where his drug addiction would later have him claim his own life in 2002. But that's a different story for a much different time. Now, to bring you up a little more up to speed, this was Thanksgiving 2009, and I feel like as a family, we're all very on board spiritually and supernaturally. We believe spirits and ghosts and all that stuff. We were even all pretty open to the idea of using a Ouija board. Yeah, we knew the risks, but we were willing to deal with those risks to try and have conversation with our long-lost grandfather. And as a bonus, we might be able to talk to other dead relatives. Or so that was the plan. In hindsight, I don't recommend doing any of these things. So, Thanksgiving 2009 rolls around. We all show up. It's me, my mother, my brother, my two sisters, and two of my cousins. The entire dinner was spent talking about him and sharing memories and laughs of my grandfather. After dinner and delicious pie, we quickly cleared the table, setting up the Ouija board, the planchette, lighting candles, and turning out all the lights. For some reason, doing this during late autumn really sets the tone and mood perfectly. So, we gathered around the table, put the planchette in the center, and began asking it questions. Asking if our grandfather Earl was there and that we could speak to him, or if there's anybody in the vicinity that could get a hold of him. We were shocked that we very soon got a reply. And looking back on things, I really wholeheartedly want to believe it was my grandfather. But I know it was probably just a demon disguising itself as him in hindsight. I first knew we had made contact with something or someone when the candles around the room began flickering. Like a breeze had somehow entered the kitchen, which would have been impossible. No windows or doors were ever open. Everything had been closed, and for the lights to all of a sudden start flickering, none of it really made sense. After I think question number 3 is when the planchette finally began moving. It started off with us getting some strange answers to our questions. We would ask, "Is this Earl our grandfather?" To which the planchette would spell out maybe. What was strange is that we asked his birthday, and it spelled out DEC 14, 1938. which was Earl's actual birthday. So we kind of got half excited but also half scared that somebody or something on this board knew of him. We had also asked it his full name, which was Earl Dickinson Hartley, which it spelt out perfectly. But then it would keep giving us strange answers to things. For example, we asked him, or what we thought was him, if he remembers us, and it just spelt out murder, which we thought was very, very strange and very disturbing. And so then we thought, oh, did he somehow get murdered? Except we knew that he had a stroke, and that's why he died. But then my mother speculated in that moment, even though he died in the hospital, is it possible that one of the doctors or nurses murdered him? We'd asked the question to try and verify if this is true, and it spelt out, kill you. And through another series of questioning, we soon realized whoever or whatever we were talking to knew everything we wanted to know about my grandfather, but it most certainly was not my grandfather. Finally, we'd asked it, to whom are we speaking to? We got no answer. And then my mother asked it, Spirit, what is your name? To which the planchet spelt out, Z-O, Z-O. And I thought to myself, Zozo? What is Zozo? And the second, in my mind, that I finished that thought, or question, the planchet, with all of our hands on it, immediately, faster than the speed of light, shot to goodbye, and all the candles in unison went out. Man, I tell you what, it was like a horror movie scene. All of us jumped up so quick to turn on the lights, and little did we know, we had somehow opened a portal with that board for that demon or entity to come through. Because very, very shortly after this event, things started to take a very, very nasty turn. About Christmas time, about a month later, there had already been all sorts of paranormal activity all around the house. Everything from creaking floorboards to hushed whispers, and the feeling like you're being watched. It was also right around this time as well that my mother really started complaining about acute back pain. It apparently came out of nowhere and got really bad. And upon going to the doctors, they told her it looked like she had some sort of severe spinal issue or spinal injury. But that was impossible. She had not fallen or done anything to hurt her back, other than maybe sleep on her side, but she had been doing that for years. But from what her doctor showed her, whatever happened to her spine was the equivalent of her falling on her back from about 12 feet up in the air. She had to have back surgery, and that put her out of work for at least, well, from what I remember, a good 6 months. Don't quote me on that, though. My timing could be very well off. One of my cousins, shortly after this, in the middle of January, passed away from a horrendous car accident. My sister, also around that same time, got a divorce, to whom her husband had become very abusive in the past couple months, nearly choking her out and trying to kill her on at least 4 separate occasions, all since Thanksgiving. This kind of thing was pretty common. Just stuff going awry and things going crazy. It felt like life was now off the hinges and everything was going haywire. And then finally, come August of the following year. So now about 9-10 plus months after the original Ouija board incident, my mother's house mysteriously caught fire and burned down. Fortunately for her, she was outside the house when this happened. But we both wholeheartedly believe that the spirit Zozo, or whatever entity it was fully responsible for all the things bad that had happened in these past 9 to 10 months. Considering we're a family that has pretty standard everyday luck. Sometimes good things happen, other times bad things happen. But ever since that incident, everybody in our family, or I should say, everybody who was attached to that board that night, has had a string of really, really bad luck, while some of us never made it out alive. Like my cousin who got into the car accident. I decided, out of desperation, to go see a demonologist, figuring they might have some answers. When I sat down with this man and explained to him what had happened to me and my entire family over the past 10-11 months. When I told him about the demon or entity named Zozo, His eyes went wide. And that's when he explained to me that Zozo is a very well-known, very powerful demon that's known for impersonating people, coming through the Ouija board portal and wreaking havoc on people's lives. It is a demon not to be trifled with, but instead of offering me any real help, he just kept pushing his pricing and services on me, which I refused to pay for. So I was pretty much on my own. After a while, my mother was living with us, and things seemed to be normal for the most part, at least until the following Thanksgiving, now a year from the last one where we had the Ouija board incident. In the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, my mother dropped down on all fours and began growling, spitting out blood, acting like an animal. My family and I were so frightened by this, we weren't sure what to do, so we called 911 and explained our situation. The cops were able to restrain her and get her to calm down. But shortly thereafter, within 30 minutes, she, or so what we were told, had a massive heart attack and died. Now, here's what's also crazy. My youngest sister, who's only 4 years younger than I, was having dinner at her boyfriend's house, about 2 hours away from where we were. FYI, she's also out of college at this point, and did not yet know about Mom dying. She too died that same night, by having a massive heart attack. But after that night, and all the trauma it produced, everything just seemed to stop altogether. I'm not sure why, I'm not sure if there's any real reasoning or logic behind it, but it just did. I'm beginning to suspect that the entity or demon named Zozo was truly behind everything, like a mad puppeteer pulling the strings to his sick orchestra, arranging for all these bad things to happen. Look, I've probably already written too much, and I apologize if this has become far too long to read. So I guess I should probably conclude things here and just say that if you're thinking about messing with the Ouija board, don't. Learn from my mistakes, because me and my entire family paid for it on Thanksgiving.